One of the biggest events in a workers' compensation claim is the attainment of maximum medical improvement and the certification of an impairment rating. And every case is entitled to an impairment rating. Now, maximum medical improvement is the point in time when you reach your greatest recovery. It's the point where there's no further recovery expected if you had any additional treatment. When you reach that point, you should get an impairment rating. And an impairment rating is a measurement of the permanent damage to your body as a result of the injury. Now in Texas, we use this book. It's called The Guides to the Evaluation of Permanent Impairment, and it's the 4th edition. And this book contains all of the different methodologies that can be used to provide an impairment rating for every particular part of your body that's injured. So for fingers, for hands, for elbows and shoulders, knees, for low backs and necks, for every different part, there's a chapter that explains how to do the impairment rating, and these become pretty important. Now, lots of doctors make lots of mistakes when they assign impairment ratings, and that's because the training that they get is different in different places. It's because the courts that interpret this book in Texas interpret it differently than other places do. It's because the courts that interpret these books will sometimes say that what it says is not what it means. And so doctors become confused because they know what doctors tell them that it means. They know what it means when they read it, but that's not what it means in the court of law. And so we have a lot of confusion and a lot of mistakes. And that means it's very important to have impairment ratings reviewed by somebody who knows what to look for. Now, lots of mistakes occur also in the selection of the maximum medical improvement date, and that's an important date. That's the date that temporary income benefits are going to end. And if you get an impairment rating, you start receiving impairment income benefits. And these are two different benefits. Sometimes they're two different amounts. Quite often, the impairment rating benefit is less than the temporary income benefit rate. So the temporary income benefits are what you got when you couldn't go to work. And the impairment benefits are what you get once you reach MMI and get an impairment rating. Now, the selection of that date is important because that's the date that changes the type of benefit that you get. If the doctor chooses a date that's not correct, it costs you money. It costs you money that you're entitled to on your claim. And so you want to make sure that that's the correct date. So if you have expected treatment coming up, in lots of cases even surgery is scheduled, and the doctors are putting these patients at maximum medical improvement, and that's just plain wrong. So if that kind of thing is happening, you know that it's time to start looking for help. You have to get that date correct or you cost yourself benefits. Now the impairment rating has to be correct too. And those mistakes are made because sometimes there are subjective differences between impairment ratings, like whether your injury is as severe as another doctor might think it is, whether you fit in one category of impairment as opposed to another. Lots of psychological impairments fit into those categories. And sometimes they're very objective, which is how much can you move your wrist? How far can you bend your elbow? Those kinds of things are more objective. And so because there's a mix of subjective and objective criteria for impairment, there's lots of room for error, and there's lots of room for doctors to determine to give a higher impairment rating or a lower impairment rating. Now if you're treating with a company doctor, sometimes they do what they can to give you the lower impairment rating. Sometimes they give you the premature maximum medical improvement date. And that's the kind of thing that we have to look out for. Now, on the impairment rating, there's lots of different ways they can go. On a back injury, for instance, most injuries are going to get a 5% impairment rating, and some are going to qualify for a 10% impairment rating. These impairment ratings are expressed as a percentage of damage to your body. And the difference between the 5% and the 10% is the level of neurological damage that you sustained as a result. So if you have a herniated disc that's pinching a nerve, and that causes radiculopathy that results in atrophy, which is a shrinking of the muscles on one side, like on one leg compared to the other. And it's a small amount. It's just 2 centimeters that we're looking for. If that exists, you qualify for the higher impairment rating. Some doctors forget to check for this. On shoulder injuries, for instance, you can have a rotator cuff repair, a surgery, and if they cut the bone in the clavicle and your collarbone, that qualifies for additional impairment beyond the range of motion loss that you might have. And many doctors forget to include that in the impairment rating. So there are many different things to look for. The impairment rating is important because if you get a 15% impairment rating or more, you might be eligible for future benefits that you can't get if your impairment is less than 15%. So sometimes 1% makes a big difference. Sometimes 5% makes a big difference. Neck injuries are either a 5% impairment rating or a 15% impairment rating. The neurological damage defines which one of those categories you'll fit in. And that difference is huge when you consider the future benefits that might be available. Now, if your impairment rating or your maximal medical improvement date are wrong, if you believe that they are incorrect, they have to be disputed. And in Texas, you only have 90 days to dispute an impairment rating. And if you don't do it within those 90 days, the impairment rating becomes final and there's not much you can do about it. There's a few exceptions, but for the most part, that impairment rating is final. And that's a very big deadline, and it's a very bad outcome if you forget or you don't understand how to dispute the impairment rating. So you're going to want to get some advice and some counsel when it comes time to dispute the impairment rating. There's 2 different ways. One way is to request a designated doctor if you haven't already been to one, and the other is to request a benefit review conference, which starts a litigation process. Both of these avenues are very difficult to get through. The designated doctor process is where you go to a doctor you've never seen before. He doesn't know you. He's just read your medical records. He's going to spend 5 minutes with you and then give you an impairment rating. And that doesn't seem quite as fair as your treating doctor who understands all you've been through, the gains that you've made, the deficits that you've had over time. You would think that the treating doctor would be in a better position to give you that impairment rating. And then on the litigation side, the insurance companies will have their attorneys there to fight against you, to assert that the lower impairment rating is the correct impairment rating. So once you get to this section of your claim, like I said, it's usually at the end when you've reached your full potential of recovery, it's going to be time to get somebody to review that impairment rating for you so that you don't get taken advantage of and so that you don't miss out on benefits that you might be entitled to.